This DVD was made by Northeast Historic Film of Bucksport, Maine, at the request of staff at the archives at the library of the University of Maine in Orono. The footage was made in Quebec, Canada, in the year of 1934 by my father, Earle Shaw, and is a winter logging operations and the spring log drive in the Laurentian Mountains. Dad graduated as a forest engineer from the University of Maine in Orono in 1916. When we lived in Canada, he was employed by the International Paper Company. And at the time he took these pictures, we lived in the settlement of St. Gervais Station, Quebec, where one of the Canadian International Paper offices was located. St. Gervais Station, trains, village, can be found on a Canadian road map about 90 miles north and slightly west of Montreal as you follow Route 117. It was a base for supplying some of the logging camps, storage barns, bateaux, raisins, food. I mentioned raisins because they had barrels, literally barrels full of raisins. And we used to go and play in the storage barns and help ourselves until Dad finally purchased one barrel exclusively for us, and we were not allowed to touch anything else. Laurentian means of, relating to, or situated in the vicinity of the St. Lawrence River. In geology, the meaning is of or relating to the gneissic granite of the early Precambrian or Archeozoic period. The Laurentians are part of the Canadian Shield, so called because of the suggested shape of the rock, which extends into the States. The mountains are not great in height. Mount Tremblant, the highest, which was just about 8 or 9 miles from St. Gervais, is 3,150 feet high and stands about 8 or 9 miles from the station. It was named Trembling Mountain by Indians for the wild thunderstorms that broke over it and the 7-mile-long lake at its base. In the 1930s, it began to be developed into a ski resort and was the site of the first Taschereau and Kandahar ski races in Canada. The Canadian Shield was the nucleus, according to the Encyclopedia, of America. It was the first part of the continent to be permanently elevated above sea level and has remained during geologic time almost wholly untouched by successive encroachments of the sea. It was repeatedly uplifted and eroded. Ice sheets scooped out lake basins and carried away much of the soil. The Laurentians, how beautiful they are, with their abrupt, steep rises covered with dark evergreens, often look like illustrations in fairy tale books, and many small villages below them place crosses at the tops of them, which are lighted at night. These hills and towns are locally known as up north and have long been developed for skiing. Ski trains ran, and no doubt still do, from Montreal on winter weekends, providing transportation to the hills and trails along the way up north. Now, some of the Laurentian slopes also have attractive little homes climbing up their sides. The opening scenes of the DVD are of a flyover of the area to be cut. These opening scenes will show pictures of the flyover of the area to be logged. The plane and pilot were rendered by the CIP company from Grey Rocks Inn Hotel. Every time they needed it. And that's the way they surveyed the land that they were going to cut. Logging was done in the winter because it's easier to get the cut logs out of the woods. They can make little woods roads and ice them down from the snow so the horses can pull the logs more easily out. They could use the rushing waters that melted in the spring to float the logs down the rivers to the lakes, where they were gathered into booms or rafts towed by tugboats to the dam at the outlet river and sent on from there again to their destination. These pictures show a logging camp where the men lived and ate and slept and took care of the horses that they used for work. Cozy, warm, used a lot of wood to heat. These are showing how they shot the logs down into piles. Here we are showing a view of them cutting the logs. Usually they cut a chip in the tree, then they sawed one on each side with a long saw back and forth until the tree fell. You had to be very careful when it started to fall, not to be in the way of it kicking back or crushing you. It was very hard, cold work, but it certainly kept you warm. These are piles of logs that they eventually piled down by rivers to get them ready for the log drive in the spring. Great, great piles of logs. These show some of the steep sides of the mountains that they had to maneuver on to cut these logs. This shows a little trail they've made, a little track they've made for horses to go on to pull the logs down from the top of the mountain. They iced them so that they'd be smoother by pouring water on them. He walked to wherever the job was. These piles of logs, when they got ready to be sent down in the spring, were checked by a man called a scaler, and he marked them for their destination at different mills. They had a special mark on the end of the log, each one of them. There he is doing it, so that they'd know when they've got them floated down which logs went to which destination. It shows somewhat the depth of the snow. There's a horse pulling on a log. You watch for a rope going from the back of the load up that trail. And at the top of the mountain, there'd be a winch and people controlling it so they could pull the load back so that on the very steep parts it wouldn't overrun the horse and hurt him. Very necessary in this operation. Took a lot of trees to make a pile like that. Again, trying to give you an idea of the steepness of the mountain they were cutting on. Timber, giving people warning to jump out of the way. My father often used to take us in the woods to see some of the spring log run, because it was so exciting to watch. There's a big load, heavy, heavy load. The horses giving their all to get it down the hill. When we visited the logging camp, the cookee would always have some great big beautiful cookies for us to eat. Might be sugar cookies filled with raspberry jam, might be molasses. They were always delicious. Lots of snow that winter, I can see, which is a good sign for the river run. Maybe it's snowing in that picture. Looks kind of blizzardy and windy to me. Some of the men working. If you didn't have a horse, you could use an oxen to travel around in the woods or anywhere. Wasn't a common sight, but now and then you'd see it. The driver hadn't any place to sit. He had to stand up at the front of the load and drive the horses. That's the winch at the top of the mountain holding back the load. And this shows you the way they got the logs up on top of the pile. They put logs to go from one load to the other and then pushed them up there with their peavies, higher and higher and higher. Peavies were invented in Maine. It was a pole with a hook on the end of it and a straight piece of metal so that you could trip it shut, to hook onto the log and then close the flat piece and pull it or push it wherever you wanted it to go. We never got that close to the horses. Dad must have taken these all by himself. The horses don't slip on these icy roads because their shoes are made with good, strong spikes, and they're very carefully shod to do this job. Between that and the brake system, they managed very well. One horse tires out and they replace him with another one. This again shows you the steepness of some of these funny little mountain hills. Double teaming that one, I guess they have to go up a little hill, so they have two teams to pull. That, I think, well, that's a truck. They used Lombard haulers, too. They were also invented in Maine. Sort of a combination between a tractor and an engine and a wagon, all in one. They can find them now and then deserted in the woods, and they have been brought out to civilization and fixed up very carefully as museum pieces in Maine. This shows an up close of one of the rigs. Rolling the logs off onto the pile. They have to be handled just so and piled just so that the load won't chip. Load after load after load. This probably is the river they're going to run them down. That's a Lombard hauler right there. You see the skis in the front? That's looks to me like the lake destination. Sometimes instead of going on the road, it was easier to travel down a river if there wasn't too much water in it. Perhaps they had no road into the camp. Here we go, the thaw is with us, and those are the rushing rivers that the logs will be sent down. All that snow is coming from those steep mountains, melting, rushing down. Sometimes they built a, let me see, I've got to think what it's called. Yeah, sometimes they built a sort of a runway of logs called a flume or a sluiceway, and they maneuvered the logs into that sluiceway and they shot down the mountain and right into the river from there. Here they are shoring up a dam. And they used rocks and they used sand and logs crossed and blocked them all up. Then they'd get the logs down to the dam, and when all was ready, they would pull the logs and the traps holding the water back to release a great gush of water that would sweep the logs down the river. This was dangerous work, all of it, because most of the men were unable to swim. Here they are in a bateau. The bateaus were the big river boats they used. There was a man in the bow to watch out for rocks and to fend them off with his oar, and a man in the rear to steer, and the boatmen in the middle had great long oars which they held upright while they were going along, so they'd be out of the way for the two men in the bow and the stern, so they could maneuver better. They've got a good rush of water there to carry them down. But sometimes a log would get hung up on a rock and then it would snag other logs until eventually it formed a log jam. And then they would have to either find a key log that would release it, or sometimes they even had to plant dynamite and blow it up to get them started again. Then they would pick them off the rocks with their peavies and send them on their way. They had to watch the whole length of the river and guide them down it to the shores of the lake. They say that the men working in the woods needed a diet of between 7,000 and 10,000 calories to be able to keep up this heavy, hard work. And the cook and his cookee to help him certainly fed them well with hearty food, well cooked, donuts, pies, roasts, baked beans, and a snack in between if you wanted it. Here's some logs they'll have to pick off and steer around. It's kind of fascinating to watch water, I think. See those logs going down it so hard. You would think they would be broken in two, but they don't seem to be. They float down just fine. That's a little shot of my mother and two of us walking along, looking at it all. This is a big jam. I bet they're going to have to dynamite that one. Yep. There it goes. He got a little wet. There are some injuries and even some deaths. It's dangerous work. But they're very quick-footed. There's a sluiceway. The logs riding over it and headed straight down the river. It looks to me like a log jam that they've just loosened and it's on the move again. Makeshift bridge. Cook and his cookie back at camp. Sometimes if they wanted to get downriver in a hurry or wanted to cross over to the other side, these woodsmen would ride a log. They had cocked boots that helped them to stay on them, and they'd use their peavies for balance, and they would roll that log over and over and over, which would make it travel to the other side of the stream. Had to be very quick on your feet. Now you can see how they maneuver the bateau with the rower holding his oar in the air to get it out of the way. Mostly they painted them dark red for some reason. They were, I'm not good at measurements, but they were probably as long as 3 normal rowboats put together and wider. Flat-bottomed. Able to ride the rapids very smoothly and safely. Crossing the river at a shallow place, but it's not easy to do with the current pushing against you. Peavies came in handy for a lot of things. Teamwork helps to push the dam apart. I'm sure they were calling out all kinds of things to each other as they went by there. gives you an idea of how fast they have to be. There he goes riding his log. He's going to see him rolling it with his feet so he can get to the other side of the river. Balancing with his peavey. They've adopted this trick in some lumber shows. They have competitions of log rolling, which are fun to watch. It looks dangerous, and it is dangerous, very. Here we are at a dam, and they're going to release the water, so there'll be a rush that'll rush the logs on down to their destination. We've opened the dam, and away go the logs, backed up behind that head of water. That's what it looks like on the other side. You saw him running on those logs. They're very, very, very quick on their feet, these men who work in the woods. Shot of my mother and a dear friend having lunch under shade. How nice. The man standing there was Peg Nanson's husband, Cora, who worked for International Paper as well. He was a Norwegian, marvelous skier. He had a real adventure coming down the side of one of those mountains at 5 o'clock at night when everybody had gone home. Got going on that icy road and found a rope stretched across it right at calf height. So there was no way to stop or no place to stop. He just got up to it, did a somersault in the air, and came down on the other side and kept going. Amazing. This is looking down on the sluice from the dam. Sending logs down the river sounds easy, but as you can see, there was a lot of work involved. And when they got done the drive, there wasn't a log to be seen, all down the river. Mother and Peg again. I think you can see for yourselves what's happening. It's just shots from different spots. My father bought a Kodak camera, one of the first that Kodak made, a movie camera. They took 8mm and 16mm films and learned how to do the splicing. So some of these shots are taken on different rivers, and he has spliced them together to explain the procedure all the way from beginning to end. So you see what happens to a tree while it's still growing on the mountainside, all the way until it gets to its destination, and it's some mill. That is the boom of logs. They chain logs together to make a surround, and then they fill the empty space with the logs that have come down the river. Then a tugboat will latch onto those to the rim of it and pull those logs down the river to the outlet end. Then they'll go down the next river until they finally get to their destination. There they are working on the edge of it. Tie it all together. Here comes the boom down the lake behind the tugboat. This is inside the mill, its final destination. The logs are piled up outside, and then they're run up a track to inside the mill, where they are debarked by machines and made ready to be put in assorted sizes of lumber for building. Here they are moving the logs onto the runway with supports on it that rolls the logs up into the mill. A little hard to see there, but that's inside. See how they roll and tumbled onto tracks, and then they're taken off of there. They go through the debarking machine, and then they're pulled off and sized. That's the way they pile it up outdoors. Those giant piles will sometimes get very hot inside because of their own weight, and they'll even catch fire sometimes, so they spray them with water. Keep that danger down.